They kicked me out on my 18th birthday for something I didn't do. Mrs. Patterson's OxyContin went missing from the lockbox in her bathroom, and since I was the newest placement in her foster home, the one she'd taken in only because the county paid her $900 a month, I was the obvious suspect, the easiest target. When you're a ward of the state, your word carries the weight of dust. The accusation came on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, my caseworker had filed the emergency removal. By Thursday morning, I was sitting in Miss Coleman's office with everything I owned stuffed into a duffel bag that smelled like the basement where I'd been sleeping. The office had that particular smell all government buildings share: burnt coffee mingling with industrial cleaner and the faint metallic tang of desperation. Miss Coleman sat across from me at a metal desk that had probably been gray once, but had faded to the color of old dishwater. Her hands were folded on top of a manila folder. My name was printed on the tab in block letters: Brooks, Willa Sterling. 18 years of my life condensed into maybe 100 pages of reports and evaluations and incident summaries. A bureaucratic autopsy of a childhood that had never really lived. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Miss Coleman had been my caseworker for 3 years, which in the revolving door of the foster system made her practically family. She knew my file by heart, knew about the 11 different placements, knew about the night terrors I'd had until I was 13. Knew that I could fix a lawnmower engine but couldn't remember my own mother's face. She cleared her throat. The sound was small and careful, like she was trying not to startle me. Your birthday is September 15th. 3 weeks from now, you'll be 18, legally an adult. The state's obligation to you ends on that date. I already knew this. Had been counting down to it with a mixture of terror and relief since I turned 17. Freedom meant I'd never have to pack that duffel bag again in the middle of the night when a placement fell through. But it also meant I'd be completely alone in a way I'd never been before. I have $37. The words came out flat, factual. I wasn't asking for sympathy, just stating reality. Miss Coleman's professional mask flickered. For just a second, I saw something human underneath. Exhaustion, maybe, or grief for all the kids like me she'd processed through this system. You have $412 in your state-mandated savings account. We'll transfer that to you on your birthday. And there's transitional housing options we can explore. The Northridge Youth Shelter has a bed available. I'd been to Northridge once for a group home visit when I was 15. 30 kids crammed into a building meant for 20. The smell of unwashed bodies and institutional soap. Fights breaking out over whose turn it was for the shower. A girl named Ashley who cried every night into her pillow. Muffled sobs that eventually just became background noise. I shook my head. Miss Coleman sighed. It was a sound that carried the weight of 1,000 similar conversations with 1,000 similar kids who all ended up in the same place. Adrift, untethered, forgotten by a system that had never really seen them as human to begin with. She reached into her desk drawer. When her hand emerged, she was holding an envelope, not the usual manila kind. This was cream-colored heavy paper that looked expensive, old, the kind of paper people used to write actual letters on before everything became emails and text messages. It was sealed with wax, lavender-colored wax, stamped with an ornate letter R. My name was written across the front in elegant, flowing cursive, not the blocky print of official documents, but real handwriting. Beautiful handwriting. This came for you. Miss Coleman slid it across the desk. Years ago. It was sent to the central office with very specific instructions. It was to be held unopened and given to you during your final transition meeting. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. The paper felt substantial under my fingers. Real. The postmark in the corner read, October 2007, Portland, Oregon, 18 years ago. Who sent it? Miss Coleman's expression softened in a way I'd never seen before. According to the return address, your grandmother, Rosalind Brooks. The letter that came with it for our office said you were to receive this when you aged out of the system, not before. I stared at the envelope. Grandmother. The word felt foreign in my mouth, like a language I'd never learned to speak. My file said I had no living relatives. My father had died when I was 2. Car accident, the official report said. My mother had abandoned us before that. No other family listed. I thought I didn't have a grandmother. Miss Coleman pulled out another sheet of paper from my file. This one was a photocopy of a handwritten letter on the same cream-colored paper. She wrote to us in 2007, said she'd been searching for you for months, but the system wouldn't give her any information. Privacy laws, you understand. She explained that she was your paternal grandmother and that she'd recently discovered you were in state care. She asked us to hold this envelope and give it to you when you were old enough to make your own decisions. Why didn't you tell me? We're not permitted to initiate family contact without proper vetting and legal proceedings. By the time the paperwork could have been processed, Miss Coleman paused. She stopped corresponding with us. We assumed she'd passed away or given up the search. I turned the envelope over. The wax seal was unbroken. Whatever was inside had been waiting for me for 18 years. My hands were steadier now as I broke the seal. The wax crumbled, releasing a faint scent of lavender that made something deep in my chest ache with a longing I didn't understand. Inside the envelope, I found a folded legal document, a brass key tarnished with age but solid and heavy, a photograph, and a handwritten note. The photograph stopped my breath. It was black and white, edges soft with age. An elderly woman stood beside a tractor, one of those old-fashioned ones from the 40s or 50s, rounded and sturdy-looking. She was wearing overalls and work boots, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. But it was her face that held me. She was smiling at the camera with an expression of such fierce joy that it seemed to radiate off the paper. I flipped the photo over. Written on the back in that same elegant script, Your Grandma Roz, 1947. The year I bought our tractor. The year I decided to build something that would last. Our tractor. As if it belonged to both of us. As if I'd been part of her life all along. The legal document was a quit-claim deed. I unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases. Property description. Lot 12, Section 8, Township 32 North, Range 14 West, Frostwood County, Montana. 120 acres, more or less. Improvements include 1 Quonset hut structure and 1 barn structure, both in as-is condition. Purchase price, $8.00 at public tax auction, October 2007. Owner, Rosalind Sterling Brooks. Grantor, to be transferred upon death to Willa Sterling Brooks. Grantee, $8. My grandmother had bought me 120 acres of land in Montana for $8. The note was on a smaller piece of the same cream paper, folded into quarters. Come home, sweetheart. Everything is waiting. The key fits the front door. The land is yours. It's not much, but it's a place to stand. A place to start. I'm sorry I couldn't find you sooner. I never stopped looking. I never stopped loving you. Grandma. The words blurred. I blinked hard, forcing the tears back. I'd learned a long time ago that crying in front of social workers only made things worse. Miss Coleman was watching me with something that looked like hope. What will you do? I looked at the photograph, at the deed, at the brass key that felt like a promise in my palm. I'm going to Montana. The Greyhound station smelled like diesel fuel and stale French fries. I bought a ticket to Kalispell, Montana, the closest city to Frostwood County that had bus service. $64. The clerk handed me the ticket without looking at my face, already focused on the next person in line. I had $6 left, enough for maybe 2 meals if I was careful. The bus didn't leave for 3 hours, so I sat on a plastic bench and read the note from my grandmother over and over. The handwriting became familiar, like I was learning the shape of her thoughts through the loops and curves of her letters. Come home, sweetheart. As if I'd ever had a home to come from in the first place. The bus was half empty when I boarded. I chose a window seat near the back and pressed my forehead against the glass, watching Portland slide away into the distance. The city gave way to suburbs, then farmland, then the wild green forests of the Pacific Northwest. I'd never been out of Oregon before, never had a reason to leave. The foster homes had all been within a 50-mile radius of Portland, a circuit of addresses that blurred together in my memory like stops on a route I'd never wanted to travel. But now I was leaving, truly leaving, heading toward something instead of away from it. The bus rumbled north through Washington. We stopped in Seattle long enough for me to buy a granola bar from a vending machine. $2.50, leaving me with $3.50. I ate it slowly, making it last. A woman sitting across the aisle kept glancing at me. She was maybe 40, with tired eyes and a cardigan that had seen better days. Eventually, she leaned over. "You traveling alone, honey?" I nodded. "You got family where you're headed?" The question should have been simple, but I didn't know how to answer it. Did I have family? I had a grandmother who'd been dead for at least 9 months, maybe longer. A grandmother I'd never met, but who'd apparently been searching for me, who'd bought land and written me a note that said, "Come home." I'm going to my grandmother's house. The lie tasted strange on my tongue because it wasn't entirely a lie. The woman smiled, relieved. "That's good. That's real good. You take care of yourself." She went back to her book and didn't speak to me again. We crossed into Idaho as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that looked too vivid to be real. I watched until the colors faded to gray, then black, then the scattered lights of small towns passing by like distant stars. I slept in fits and starts, my head bumping against the window. Every time I woke, I checked to make sure the envelope was still in my backpack. The deed, the key, the photograph. Proof that someone had wanted me. Proof that I wasn't just a file number in a system that would forget me the moment I aged out. We reached Spokane in the middle of the night. The bus station was nearly empty, just a handful of other travelers hunched in plastic chairs, waiting for connections. I bought a package of crackers from a vending machine. $1. $2.50 left. The next leg took us through the Idaho panhandle and into Montana as dawn broke. The landscape transformed outside my window. Mountains rising up like ancient guardians. Forests so dense they looked black. Rivers cutting through valleys with a wild intensity that made my chest tight. This was big country. Empty country. The kind of place where you could disappear if you wanted to. Or maybe the kind of place where you could finally be found. We reached Missoula by mid-morning. I had to transfer buses again, this time to a smaller regional line that served the rural counties up north. The new bus was older, rattling along 2-lane highways that climbed higher and higher into the mountains. The other passengers were different here. Men in Carhartt jackets and work boots, their faces weathered by sun and wind. Women with grocery bags and tired expressions. A teenage boy with headphones, staring out the window with the blank look of someone who'd made this trip 1,000 times. Nobody talked to me. Nobody looked at me. I was invisible again, which should have felt familiar, but instead felt like freedom. The temperature dropped as we climbed. Even through the bus windows, I could feel the cold seeping in. It was late September, but this far north it already felt like winter was gathering its strength. We stopped in a town called Whitefish, then another called Eureka. The stops got smaller, the towns more sparse. Finally, 3 days after leaving Portland, the bus pulled into Cedar Falls. Calling it a town was generous. There was a gas station with 2 pumps, a general store with a hand-painted sign that read Whitmore's General and Feed, a diner with a flickering neon sign in the window. That was it. Maybe a dozen other buildings scattered along a single main street, and then nothing but forest pressing in from all sides. I was the only person who got off the bus. The driver handed me my duffel bag from the luggage compartment. "You sure this is your stop, miss?" "I'm sure." He looked doubtful, but shrugged and climbed back aboard. The bus pulled away, leaving me standing on a cracked sidewalk with my duffel at my feet and $2.50 in my pocket. The air hit me like a physical force. It was cold, colder than any Portland autumn I'd ever experienced. Sharp and clean, and so thin it made my lungs ache. The smell was different too. Pine and wood smoke and something wild I couldn't name. Something that felt older than cities, older than roads, older than the foster system that had raised me. I picked up my duffel and walked toward the general store. The bell above the door chimed as I pushed inside. The interior was warm, heated by a wood stove in the corner that radiated blessed heat. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from canned goods to motor oil to fishing tackle. A post office counter occupied one corner, and a small cafe area with 3 tables sat near the front window. Behind the main counter stood a woman who looked to be in her late 60s. Silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, sharp blue eyes, face lined with the kind of wrinkles that came from smiling more than frowning. She wore a flannel shirt and jeans, practical boots. She looked up as I approached, and something in her expression shifted, softened. "Help you, honey?" I pulled out the deed, my hands clumsy with cold. "I'm looking for this address, the Brooks property." She took the paper from me, but her eyes never left my face. She read the deed slowly, then read it again. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with something that looked like tears. "Brooks." Her voice was barely a whisper. "You're Roz's granddaughter." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. The woman came around the counter so fast I took a step back, but she didn't touch me. Just stood there, studying my face like she was trying to memorize it. Lord have mercy. You have her eyes, exactly her eyes. She pressed a hand to her chest. "I'm Vera Whitmore. Your grandmother was my best friend for 40 years. You knew her." "Knew her?" Vera's laugh was sharp with grief. "Roz Brooks was the finest woman I ever met, stubborn as a mule and twice as hard-headed, but with a heart bigger than this whole county. She never stopped looking for you, child. Never stopped." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. Looking for me? Every single day. She wrote letters, made phone calls, hired a private investigator at one point, though God knows she couldn't afford it. The system kept telling her there was no Willa Brooks in Portland. Privacy laws, they said. Protection of the child, they said. Vera's expression hardened. But it was just bureaucratic incompetence. They had you listed in Portland, Maine in their database. Wrong coast entirely. By the time anyone realized the mistake, you'd been moved to 6 different homes, and the paper trail was a mess. My throat was too tight to speak. She passed 9 months ago, March 15th. Vera's voice cracked. "Heart attack, the doctor said. Found her out at the property, slumped over in the barn. She'd been working on that old tractor of hers. I thought of the photograph. My grandmother at maybe 30 years old, standing beside that same tractor with that fierce joy in her eyes. And then dying beside it 40 years later, still alone, still searching for a granddaughter she'd never found. Did she know about the envelope? That it was waiting for me? Vera nodded. She set it all up years ago. Paid a lawyer in Missoula to handle the estate transfer. Made sure everything was legal and proper. She said when you turned 18, you'd get the deed and you'd come home. She believed it right up until the end. The bell above the door chimed again. A man walked in, mid-30s, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing work clothes and carrying a toolbox. He had the same sharp blue eyes as Vera, the same practical bearing. Vera turned. "Holden, come here. This is Willa Brooks, Roz's granddaughter." The man, Holden, set down his toolbox and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe? Or recognition. Willa. He said my name like he'd heard it before, like it meant something. You came. I didn't know what else to do. Something in his expression softened. Your grandmother talked about you. Used to come into the store every week and tell Ma that she'd heard from the investigator, or sent another letter, or found another lead. She never gave up hope. The weight of 18 years pressed down on me. 18 years of searching. 18 years of letters and phone calls and hope that must have worn thinner with each passing month, but never quite broke. I need to see the property. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Holden nodded. I'll drive you. Road's not great this time of year and it's 15 miles out. You won't make it on foot before dark. Vera touched my arm, gentle as a question. You eaten today, honey? I shook my head. She disappeared into the back and returned with a paper bag, sandwiches, and some apples. And here. She pressed something into my hand. 2 $20 bills. Consider it a loan until you get settled. I can't. You can. Vera's voice was firm. Roz would have my hide if I let her granddaughter go hungry. You pay me back when you're able. The kindness was so unexpected, so complete, that I couldn't speak. I just nodded and clutched the bag like a lifeline. Holden's truck was an old Ford, primer gray with rust eating through the wheel wells. The heater worked though, blasting lukewarm air that smelled like motor oil and dust. I climbed into the passenger seat and we pulled out onto the main road. The paved road lasted maybe 3 miles before turning to gravel. The gravel lasted another 5 miles before becoming dirt. The truck climbed steadily, the forest pressing closer on both sides. Pine and spruce and birch, their branches interlocking overhead to create a tunnel of green-black shadow. Holden didn't talk much, which I appreciated. The silence felt companionable rather than awkward. Every so often he'd point out a landmark, an old logging road, a creek crossing, a burned section of forest from a wildfire years ago. Finally, the road opened into a clearing, and there it was. The Quonset hut sat in the middle of the clearing like some kind of alien artifact, a half-cylinder of corrugated metal, maybe 40 feet long and 20 feet wide, streaked with rust and age. Next to it stood a barn, sagging but still standing, and in front of the barn, like a monument to another era, sat the tractor from the photograph. It was red once. I could tell from the patches where paint still clung to the metal, but time and weather had turned most of it to rust. One tire was completely flat. The other 3 looked questionable. The seat was cracked leather, stuffing visible through the splits. But it was the same tractor. The same John Deere Model A from 1947. The same machine my grandmother had stood beside in that photograph, smiling like she'd just conquered the world. Holden cut the engine. "This is it. Your inheritance." I couldn't speak, couldn't move, just stared at the Quonset hut and the barn and the tractor, and tried to understand that this was mine, that someone had bought this land, had built this shelter, had waited 18 years for me to arrive. Holden climbed out and I followed, my legs shaky. The cold hit me immediately, sharper now, more intense. The sun was low on the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Beautiful and terrifying all at once. "You gonna be okay out here?" Holden's concern was genuine. "Temperature's supposed to drop tonight, down to 10, maybe 12 below." I thought of the youth shelter in Northridge, the crowded rooms and thin walls and smell of despair. Then I looked at the Quonset hut, rusted and old and probably freezing inside, but mine. "I'll be okay." He looked doubtful but nodded. "I'll come check on you tomorrow. Bring some firewood and supplies. And here." He pulled a card from his wallet. "That's the store number. You need anything, you call. Ma will send me running." "Thank you." He climbed back in the truck, then paused with the door half open. "Your grandmother was a good woman, Willa. Best I ever knew. I'm glad you're here." Then he was gone, the truck rattling back down the dirt road, leaving me alone in the clearing with my duffel bag and my inheritance, and the weight of 18 years of searching that had ended 9 months too late. I walked to the Quonset hut. The brass key slid into the padlock like it had been waiting for me. The lock was stiff, resisting, then gave way with a metallic screech that echoed across the clearing. The door was heavy. I had to put my shoulder into it to push it open. Inside, the air was colder than outside. Dead air, trapped and still. The only light came from the open door and from dirty windows set high in the curved walls, grimy with years of dust. The space was one long room. A wood stove squatted in the center, its pipe extending up through the roof. Against one wall stood a metal cot with a thin mattress. A wooden table with 3 legs and a stack of books propping up the 4th corner. 2 chairs, one missing its back, and in the corner, a rocking chair. On the table sat a mason jar filled with cash. I counted it. $89 in small bills, 1s and 5s mostly. Next to the jar, 3 cans of soup, an oil lamp, a box of matches. The poverty of it struck me. This was what my grandmother had built for me over 18 years. A tin can in the wilderness, and $89. But then I looked at the rocking chair and saw something that made my breath catch. Carved into the wooden armrest, so small I almost missed it. WSB, Willa Sterling Brooks. She'd carved my initials. Before I was born, before I disappeared into the system, before 18 years of searching, she'd carved my initials into a rocking chair and waited for me to come home. I sank into the chair and it creaked under my weight, a sound that was almost musical. The motion was smooth, well-worn, like it had been rocked in 10,000 times before. And for the first time since Ms. Coleman's office, since the envelope, since the 3-day bus ride and the cold mountain air and the rusted tractor outside, I let myself cry. Not the quiet tears I'd learned to hide from social workers and foster parents. Real crying, the kind that came from somewhere deep and broken, and had been locked away for so long I'd forgotten it existed. I cried for the grandmother I'd never meet, for 18 years of letters that never reached me, for a childhood spent believing I was unwanted when all along someone had been searching, for the loneliness that felt like it might crack my chest open. The rocking chair creaked and creaked and creaked, and eventually the tears stopped. The sun had set while I cried. The temperature was dropping fast. I could see my breath in the dim light. I forced myself to stand, to move, to think. Survival first, grief later. The wood stove had a small pile of kindling beside it, but the wood was damp and half-rotted. I'd have to find better fuel. I opened the stove door and found the remnants of an old fire, ash and a few chunks of charred wood. I used the matches from the table to light the oil lamp. The flame caught and held, casting warm light across the space. It helped, psychologically, if not practically. Outside, I gathered what dry branches I could find, breaking them over my knee. My hands were numb within minutes. The cold here was different from Portland rain cold. This was a bone-deep cold that felt like it was trying to squeeze the life out of me. Back inside, I crumpled some paper from my backpack, old receipts, a flyer someone had handed me at the bus station, and built a tiny teepee of the driest twigs. The first match went out immediately. The second caught, but didn't spread. The third finally took, and I nursed the flame like my life depended on it. Because maybe it did. The fire grew slowly, reluctantly. I fed it stick by stick, barely breathing, terrified it would go out. After 20 minutes, I had a real fire, small but steady. The warmth it produced was minimal. It barely heated the space immediately around the stove, but it was something. I opened one of the cans of soup and set it on the flat top of the stove to heat. While I waited, I explored the rest of the hut. There wasn't much. The mattress on the cot was stained and musty. I wouldn't be sleeping on that. The books propping up the table leg were old paperbacks, their covers faded. One was a survival guide for living off the land. Another was a collection of poetry by someone named Mary Oliver. The third was a journal, handmade, the pages yellowed. I opened the journal carefully. The first page was dated January 2008, just a few months after my grandmother had bought this land. Started building today. Cleared the site for the Quonset hut. Hard work, but good work. Willa will need a solid shelter when she comes home. The handwriting was my grandmother's. I recognized it from the note. I flipped through the pages. Entries about construction, about learning to use tools, about surviving her first Montana winter. And scattered throughout, entries about me. Called the investigator today. Another dead end. The system says there's no Willa Brooks in Portland. But I know she's out there. I can feel it. Or, it's been 3 years. Sometimes I wonder if I'm chasing a ghost. But then I remember holding Daniel's baby girl, just hours old, and I know she's real. She has to be somewhere. Or, Willa would be 10 today. Double digits. I wonder if she likes to read, like I did. I bought her a book, just in case. It's waiting with all the others. I dragged the cot closer to the stove and laid my coat over the questionable mattress to create a barrier. Used my duffel as a pillow. Pulled the thin wool blanket up to my chin. The fire crackled. Shadows danced on the curved metal walls. The cold pressed in from all sides, patient and relentless. I thought about Vera's words. She never stopped looking for you. Never stopped. And I thought about my grandmother's journal entry. I know she's out there. I can feel it. For 18 years, we'd been searching for each other, across a distance created by bureaucratic mistakes and bad luck, and a system that treated children like file numbers instead of human beings. And now I was here, in the shelter she'd built, breathing air she'd breathed, sitting in a chair she'd carved with my initials. But she was gone. I pulled the envelope from my backpack and looked at it in the firelight. The deed. The photograph. the note that said, "Come home." And then I saw something I'd missed before. There was something else in the envelope, tucked into a fold. A small brass key, different from the front door key, smaller, older looking. I held it up to the lamplight. There was a tiny tag attached with a piece of string. The tag had one word written on it in my grandmother's handwriting. Tractor. My heart hammered. I looked out the window toward the barn, barely visible in the darkness. Tomorrow. I'd explore tomorrow. Tonight, I just needed to survive. I fed the fire one more stick and settled back onto the cot. The cold seeped through my coat, through the blanket, into my bones. But I'd survived worse. Foster homes that forgot to buy groceries. Winters when my only coat had been too small for 2 years. Nights when the only warmth came from knowing that eventually, somewhere, things had to get better. Maybe this was better. Maybe this rusted metal shell in the middle of nowhere was the beginning of something, instead of the end. I closed my eyes and listened to the fire crackle, and the metal contract with cold, and the wind howl through the trees. And for the first time in 18 years, I was home. Morning came gray and cold. I woke to frozen condensation on the inside of the windows, my breath visible in clouds. The fire had died to embers. My body ached from the thin mattress and the cold that had seeped into every joint. I rebuilt the fire first, fed it the last of my gathered wood. It caught easier this time, like I was learning the rhythm of it. I ate one of Vera's sandwiches for breakfast, forcing myself to chew slowly to make it last. Then I pulled on my coat and stepped outside. The temperature had to be below 0. The cold was a living thing, aggressive and mean. It burned my lungs with each breath, made my eyes water, turned my fingers numb in seconds. But the view took my breath away for different reasons. The clearing sat in a bowl of mountains, pine forests rising on all sides. The sky was that particular shade of blue-gray that promised snow. Everything was dusted with frost, sparkling in the weak morning light like someone had scattered diamonds across the world. This was mine. All of it. 120 acres of wilderness that my grandmother had bought for $8 and built into a sanctuary. I walked to the barn. The door was heavy, swollen with moisture, but it scraped open when I put my weight into it. Inside, the barn smelled like old hay and motor oil and decades of weather. Light filtered through gaps in the walls, illuminating dust motes that danced in the cold air. And there, in the center of the barn like an altar, sat the tractor. I approached it slowly. The red paint was mostly rust now, but underneath I could see the solid bones of good machinery. John Deere Model A. The same one from the photograph, the same one my grandmother had died beside. The seat was cracked leather, stuffing sprouting through the tears. I climbed up and sat in it, and something about the position, the height, the view through the windscreen, felt right. Like I was supposed to be here. I pulled out the small brass key and looked at the ignition. The key slid in perfectly. I turned it. Nothing happened. Not even a click. The engine was dead, or frozen, or both. But I hadn't expected it to start, hadn't dared hope for something that easy. I climbed down and walked around the tractor, running my hands over the cold metal. That's when I noticed the seat was sitting oddly, like it wasn't quite flush with the frame. I grabbed the edge and pulled. The seat cushion resisted, then came free with a tearing sound of old leather and decades-old adhesive. Underneath was a metal compartment. My hands shook as I pried open the lid. Inside were stacks of money. Small bills, 1s, 5s, 10s, 20s, rubber-banded into neat bundles. I counted quickly, my breath coming fast. $6,200. And beneath the money, bundles and bundles of envelopes. White envelopes, maybe 100 of them. 200. More. I pulled out the top bundle with trembling hands. They were all addressed to me. Different addresses, foster homes I barely remembered living in. The Sanders family on Maple Street, the Johnsons on Oak, the group home on 23rd. Every envelope had a stamp. Every envelope had my name in my grandmother's elegant handwriting. And every single one was stamped in red ink. Return to sender. Addressee unknown. I counted them. 247 letters. For 18 years, my grandmother had written to me every single week. And every single letter had come back. I opened the first one, my hands so shaky I could barely unfold the paper. The postmark was September 16th, 2007. My first birthday. My dearest Willa, today you are 1 year old. I imagine you taking your first steps, maybe saying your first words. Are you walking yet, sweetheart? Do you laugh easily? I hope whoever is caring for you makes you laugh. They won't tell me where you are. The social services people say it's for your protection. But how can I protect you if I can't find you? I bought land today. 120 acres in Montana. It's wild and remote and beautiful. I'm going to build you a home here. When I find you, and I will find you, my darling girl, you'll have a place that's yours. A place that nobody can take away. I'm sending this letter to the last address I had. I know it won't reach you. The investigator told me you've been moved again. But I'm going to keep writing anyway. Because someday, somehow, these letters will find their way to you. And you'll know. You'll know you were never alone. You'll know someone was always looking. You'll know you were loved every single day of your life. Happy birthday, my sweet Willa. All my love, Grandma Roz. I read letter after letter, sitting on the cold barn floor with my back against the tractor tire. She'd written about her days, about building the Quonset hut, about learning to survive Montana winters. She'd written about memories of my father as a boy, about her own mother, and the generational line of stubborn women I came from. And she'd written to me, to a granddaughter she'd never met but loved with a fierceness that poured off every page. Letter number 52, my second birthday. You're 2 today. The terrible 2s, people say, but I never believed in that nonsense. 2 is when children start discovering their power. I hope you're strong, Willa. I hope you're stubborn like your grandmother. You'll need to be. Letter number 100, my 7th birthday. 7 years old. You're probably in school now. I wonder if you like to read. I was always a reader. Used to hide under the covers with a flashlight, reading until my mother made me turn it off. I've been buying you books, sweetheart. 1 for each birthday. They're waiting for you. Letter number 173, my 15th birthday. 15, almost grown. I wonder what you look like now. Do you have my eyes? Your father's dark hair? Sometimes I see girls your age in town and I wonder, could that be her? But I know it's not. You're in Oregon, miles and miles away. But not forever. I promise you, not forever. Letter number 247, the last one, dated February 28th, 2025. My darling Willa, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you found your way home. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Sorry I couldn't find you in time. Sorry you had to grow up without family. Sorry for all the years we lost. But I never stopped looking. I never stopped loving you, not for a single day in 18 years. This land is yours now. The tractor was mine, and my mother's before me, and her mother's before that. 4 generations of Brooks women. You're the 5th. They'll come for this land. Powerful men who see only dollar signs where there should be legacy. Don't let them take it. This is your birthright, your home. The truth is hidden, Willa. Look where the water runs deepest. Fight, sweetheart. You're stronger than you know. You have generations of stubborn women standing behind you. I love you. I have always loved you. I will always love you. Come home. Grandma Roz. I sat in that barn, surrounded by 247 letters and $6,000 in cash, and the rusted bones of a tractor that had outlived the woman who drove it. And I cried. Not the desperate tears from last night. These were different. Deeper. They came from a place I didn't know existed. A place where grief and love and rage and gratitude all mixed together into something too big for my chest to contain. My grandmother had loved me. For 18 years, she had loved me with a persistence that defied every obstacle the system had put in her way. She'd written to me every week, even when the letters came back. She'd built me a home even when she didn't know if I'd ever find it. She'd believed in me even when I was just a ghost, a memory of a baby she'd held once before the social workers took me away. And I'd never known. For 18 years, I'd believed I was unwanted, abandoned. A burden passed from home to home because nobody wanted to keep me. But all along, someone had been fighting to find me. Someone had been waiting. The sun had climbed higher while I read. The barn was slightly less freezing now, though my tears had left cold tracks on my face. I wiped my eyes and looked at the last letter again. The truth is hidden. Look where the water runs deepest. What truth? What water? I stood, my legs stiff from sitting, and walked to the barn door. Behind the barn, maybe 50 yards into the trees, I could see the stone rim of something. A well. My grandmother's final words weren't just poetry. They were directions. The well sat 50 yards behind the barn, half hidden by saplings that had grown up around it over the years. The stone rim was old, mortared together with skill that spoke of another century. Someone had built this to last, maybe 100 years ago, maybe more. The wooden cover was heavy, waterlogged, green with moss. I pried it up with a piece of lumber I found leaning against the barn. The wood cracked and groaned, but finally gave way. The smell that rose up was mineral and damp. I peered over the edge into darkness. No reflection of sky, no glimmer of water. Either the well was dry or the water was too far down to catch the light. There was a rope tied to an iron ring embedded in the stone. I tested it, pulling gently. It held. Something was attached to the other end, heavy enough to make the rope creak. I pulled, hand over hand. My palms burned against the rough hemp. The cold made my fingers clumsy, nearly numb. But I kept pulling, and slowly, inch by inch, something emerged from the darkness. A bucket. Old galvanized steel, dented and rusted. But inside the bucket, wrapped in layers of plastic sheeting, was a bag. I dragged it onto the frozen ground and unwrapped it with shaking hands. The plastic was thick, the kind meant for long-term storage. Inside was a waterproof camping bag, the expensive kind. And inside that, files. The first folder contained water testing reports, dozens of them, dating from 2020 through 2024. Professional lab work, Official letterhead. The numbers meant nothing to me at first. pH levels, mineral content, flow rates. But there were handwritten notes in the margins, in my grandmother's writing. Purest water in the state, possibly the country. And volume estimate. 500 million gallons. Replenishment rate suggests ancient aquifer. The next document was a geological survey from 1962. Official U.S. military document, marked declassified across the top in faded red ink. It showed underground water formations across this region of Montana, with this specific area circled in what looked like my grandmother's pen. A notation on the side. Primary headwater source. All downstream properties dependent on this parcel for water rights. There was a newer survey, too. This one dated 2019. Private company letterhead, Clearwater Geological Consulting. The language was technical, but the conclusion was clear enough. Estimated commercial value of water rights, $80 to $120 million, assuming standard municipal water rates and current demand projections. My hands went numb, and not from the cold. $80 to $120 million. That's what the water under my grandmother's $8 piece of land was worth. The next folder was labeled Blackwood, in my grandmother's careful script. Inside were photographs. Marcus Blackwood. I recognized him from his brief visit yesterday, though I hadn't known his name, meeting with men in suits outside official-looking buildings. The county courthouse, the sheriff's office, a restaurant with white tablecloths visible through the windows, and photocopies of checks. Blackwood Development Corp. to James Patterson, County Supervisor, $50,000. Notation, consulting fee. Blackwood Development Corp. to Sheriff William Harding, $25,000. Notation, security services. Blackwood Development Corp. to Dr. Gerald Hammond, $75,000. Notation, medical consultation. Bribes. They were bribes, barely disguised. The last item in the bag was a journal, leather-bound, similar to the one I'd found in the Quonset hut, but smaller, more recent. I opened it with trembling fingers. The entries started in 2020. January 15th, 2020. Man named Marcus Blackwood came to the property today. Wants to buy the land. Offered $50,000. I told him no. This land is for Willa. He didn't take it well. Said I should reconsider before circumstances change. What circumstances? I don't trust him. March 2020. Blackwood came back. Raised his offer to $75,000. When I refused again, he mentioned he'd heard about Henry Patterson's land, the adjacent parcel to the north. Said Henry's considering his options. Henry's 73 years old and has lived on that land his whole life. He'd never sell. June 2020. Henry Patterson died in his sleep last week. Heart attack, Doc Hammond said. Sudden. Henry's daughter sold the land within a month. Guess who bought it? Blackwood Development. I asked Doc Hammond about it. Seemed strange for Henry to go so sudden when he just had a clean bill of health. Doc got defensive, said sometimes these things happen, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. My stomach went cold. September 2021. Another one. Sarah Morrison, East Parcel. Car accident off Echo Ridge Road. Terrible tragedy, everyone says. But Sarah drove that road twice a day for 20 years, knew every curve, and the weather was clear. Blackwood bought her land from the grieving husband. I'm seeing a pattern. December 2022. Tom Whitfield, West Parcel. Pneumonia, they said. Dead within a week. Tom was healthy as a horse. Blackwood bought that land too. 3 adjacent parcels in 3 years. All deaths ruled natural or accidental. All owners who refused to sell. I'm not paranoid. I'm paying attention. February 2023. I hired a private investigator. Cost me $5,000 I didn't have. He confirmed what I suspected. Every landowner who refused Blackwood's offers is now dead. Every parcel Blackwood wanted is now his. Except mine. The investigator said I should go to the authorities. I tried. Sheriff Harding, who's on Blackwood's payroll according to my research, said I was grief-stricken and seeing conspiracies. Threatened to have me evaluated for mental competency if I kept making baseless accusations. My throat was tight. August 2024. Blackwood came again. This time with a different approach. Friendly, concerned. Said he's worried about me living alone at my age. Offered $100,000. More than fair for undeveloped land, he said. I told him this land isn't for sale at any price. He smiled, but his eyes were cold. I hope you don't have any health issues, Mrs. Brooks. At your age, you never know when these things might develop. November 2024. Started having chest pains. Nothing severe, just occasional tightness. Went to see Doc Hammond. He prescribed nitroglycerin, said it was probably angina, common at my age. But I've never had heart problems. My mother lived to 94 with a heart strong as a drum. I'm 76 and I can still split wood and haul water. This doesn't feel right. December 2024. Chest pains getting worse. Doc wants me to come in for more tests, but I noticed something. The pain started 2 weeks after I had tea with Doc at his office. He was very insistent I drink it, said it was a special herbal blend, good for circulation. I was thirsty, so I drank it. Pain started 3 days later. I'm hiding copies of everything in the well. If something happens to me, I want Willa to know. I want her to understand this wasn't just land. This was worth killing for. And powerful men did. January 2025. I know what they're doing. I looked up the symptoms. Digitalis poisoning. It mimics heart disease perfectly. Small doses over time, building up in the system. By the time it kills you, it looks like natural heart failure. And who would question it in a 76-year-old woman? I confronted Doc Hammond, told him I knew. He went white. Started stammering about how he didn't have a choice, how Blackwood would destroy him if he didn't cooperate. I should have recorded it. I should have gotten proof. But I was so angry I just left. They'll kill me soon. I know this. But I've made arrangements. The land goes to Willa. All the evidence is hidden. If she's smart, and she's a Brooks woman, so she will be, she'll find it. She'll finish this. February 28th, 2025. Last entry. Willa, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I know how it'll happen. Doc will come to check on me, give me something, an injection, a pill, something to speed up the digitalis already in my system. My heart will stop. He'll sign the death certificate. Natural causes. And Blackwood will come to you with his offers and his threats and his smiles that don't reach his eyes. Don't trust the sheriff. Don't trust the county supervisor. Don't trust Doc Hammond. Trust Vera. She's been my friend for 40 years, and she's the only person in this county Blackwood couldn't buy. Fight them, sweetheart. You're the last thing standing between that bastard and $120 million. He killed 4 people to get this far. He won't hesitate to make you the 5th. But you're stronger than he knows. You have something he doesn't. You have nothing to lose. And that makes you dangerous. I love you. Finish this. The journal fell from my numb fingers. My grandmother had been murdered, not just died. Murdered. Slowly, deliberately, over months. Poisoned until her heart gave out. Also, a man in an expensive suit could steal water rights worth $100 million. And I was next. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Blackwood had come to the property yesterday, had looked at me with those cold eyes and offered me money. And when I refused, just like my grandmother had refused, just like the 4 dead landowners before her had refused, he'd smiled. I thought about his words. I hope you don't have any health issues. At your age, these things happen. He was going to kill me, too. I gathered all the documents, shoved them back in the waterproof bag, and ran. Not away from the property. I had nowhere to run to. But toward the only person my grandmother had told me to trust. Vera. The 15-mile walk to Cedar Falls took me 4 hours. My feet were blistered. My lungs burned from breathing the frozen air, and I was running on adrenaline and terror and the bone-deep knowledge that if I stopped moving, I'd collapse. The sun was high and weak by the time I stumbled through the door of Whitmore's General and Feed. Vera looked up from the counter where she was sorting mail. Her expression shifted from surprise to alarm. Lord, child, you walked all the way here? I dropped the waterproof bag on the counter. My grandmother was murdered. The color drained from Vera's face. She flipped the sign on the door to closed, locked it, and pulled me to the back room. A small office, cluttered but warm, with a space heater glowing in the corner and a coffee pot that smelled like it had been on since dawn. She poured me coffee in a chipped mug. I wrapped my hands around it and let the heat seep into my frozen fingers while I told her everything. The well, the files, the journal, the pattern of deaths. When I finished, Vera's hands were shaking. I knew it. Her voice was barely a whisper. I knew something wasn't right about Roz's death. She was healthy, strong, and then suddenly chest pains, and 2 weeks later she was dead. Doc Hammond wouldn't let me see the body before the cremation, said it was Roz's wishes. But Roz never wanted to be cremated. She wanted to be buried next to her husband in the cemetery on Miller Road. They destroyed the evidence. Vera nodded slowly. And now you're the only thing standing between Blackwood and that land. The coffee was hot and bitter. I drank it anyway, needing the warmth, needing something to do with my shaking hands. The door to the back room opened. Holden stood there, his expression shifting from confusion to concern when he saw my face. What happened? I told him, showed him the files, watched his jaw tighten as he read his grandmother's journal, as he saw the pattern of deaths, as he understood what it meant. When he looked up, there was something dangerous in his eyes. We go to the police. Sheriff Harding is on Blackwood's payroll. I pointed to the check copies. $25,000 for security services. State police, then. Vera shook her head. County Supervisor Patterson is the one who coordinates with state authorities. He's taking $50,000 from Blackwood. Holden stood, paced the small office like a caged animal. Then we go federal. FBI. This is murder, conspiracy, fraud, corruption. They have to listen. Vera's expression was grim. They might, if we have enough proof to make them pay attention. Right now we have a dead woman's journal and some suspicious coincidences. We need more. The bell above the front door chimed. All 3 of us froze. Vera moved to the office door and peered out. Her shoulders relaxed. It's Maggie and Gus. She unlocked the front door. 2 people entered. A young woman, maybe mid-20s, with strawberry blonde hair and a diner uniform under her coat. And an old man, bent with age but with sharp eyes that missed nothing. The young woman, Maggie, looked at me with open curiosity.
"You're the Brooks girl. Vera called me. Said we needed to talk."
Gus shuffled to a chair near the space heater and lowered himself down with a grunt.
"Heard you found Roz's research. About time. That woman spent 5 years putting those pieces together."
"You knew?" "Course I knew." Gus's voice was rough with age and cigarettes. "Been living in this county for 79 years. I know when something's rotten. And Blackwood's been rotten since he showed up here in 2010. Maggie pulled up a chair. "Tell us what you found." I spread the documents across the counter. Water reports, geological surveys, the checks, the list of dead landowners, my grandmother's journal. Maggie read in silence, her expression growing darker. When she finished, she looked up at Vera. She was right. About all of it. Gus leaned forward. "Let me tell you about those accidents. Henry Patterson was my fishing buddy for 40 years. Day before he died, he told me Blackwood had come by with threats. Said if Henry didn't sell, there'd be consequences for his family. Henry's daughter, she lives in Billings with 3 kids. Henry was terrified for them. Then boom, dead in his sleep. Doc Hammond signed the death certificate before the body was even cold." "And Sarah Morrison?" Maggie spoke up. "I knew Sarah. She came into the diner every Sunday after church. 3 weeks before she died, she told me Blackwood had been harassing her, showing up at odd hours, making veiled threats. She wanted to go to the police but was scared. Then her car goes off the road on a clear day. Single vehicle accident, no witnesses." "Tom Whitfield?" Gus's expression was hard. "Tom was healthy, until he wasn't. Pneumonia, they said. But I saw him the week before. He was fine, chopping wood, hauling supplies. Then suddenly he's dead. His son sold the land within days, didn't even question it, just wanted it over with." The bell chimed again. We all tensed. Vera looked out. Her expression shifted to something warmer. "It's Sloan." A woman entered, early 40s, dark hair pulled back in a professional bun, wearing a wool coat and carrying a leather briefcase. She had the bearing of someone used to being the smartest person in the room. "Vera Whitmore, you called and said emergency. I drove up from Billings through freezing rain, so this better be." She stopped when she saw the documents spread across the counter. "What is this?" Vera gestured to me. "Willa Brooks meets Sloan Pemberton, environmental attorney. Just moved to Cedar Falls last month. Sloan, meet Roz Brooks's granddaughter, and evidence that Marcus Blackwood has been murdering landowners to steal water rights." Sloan set down her briefcase and approached the counter. She spent 20 minutes reading everything, not speaking, just absorbing. When she looked up, her expression was clinical, professional, and absolutely furious. "This is federal. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, public corruption, water rights theft. We're talking RICO statutes, life in prison if we can prove even half of this." "Can we prove it?" Sloan tapped the journal. "This is compelling, but it's hearsay. The checks are good. They establish a pattern of bribes. The geological surveys prove motive. But we need solid evidence of the murders themselves. Toxicology reports, witness testimony, something that definitively shows these weren't natural deaths. They cremated my grandmother." I heard the flatness in my own voice. No body to test. Sloan's jaw tightened. "Convenient." "What about the others?" "Henry was cremated too." Gus shifted in his chair. "So was Tom. But Sarah Morrison was buried. Her husband couldn't afford cremation." Sloan pulled out her phone. "I'll file for an exhumation order.
If Doc Hammond poisoned her like he did Roz Brooks, there'll be traces in the tissue. Digitalis accumulates in the body. It'll still be there. That'll take weeks. Holden's frustration was evident. Months, probably. Then we work faster. Sloane's tone was sharp, focused.
We need to find Dr. Hammond and get him to flip. He's the weak link. According to this journal, Roz confronted him and he practically confessed. If we can get him on record, the lights went out. For a second, we all froze in darkness. Then the emergency lights kicked on, dim and red-tinged. Vera moved to the window. Power's out on the whole street. No, wait. She pointed. Across the street, lights were on. The gas station was lit up. So was the diner. Just this building. Holden was already at the back door, peering into the alley. Someone cut the line. Fresh marks on the cable. We're not safe here. Maggie's voice was tight. If Blackwood knows. A car engine roared to life outside. Headlights swept across the front windows. Too bright, too high. Not a normal car. Black Mercedes SUV. My stomach dropped. Vera grabbed the documents, shoving them back into the waterproof bag. Willa, take these. Go out the back. Holden, get her to your place. We'll deal with this. I'm not running. You're not running, you're surviving. Vera's voice had steel in it. Roz didn't die so you could be stubborn. Go. The front door opened. No bell this time. Someone had disabled it. Marcus Blackwood stood in the doorway, backlit by his headlights. He wasn't alone. 3 men in dark suits flanked him, and their jackets bulged in ways that suggested they weren't carrying wallets. Miss Brooks. His voice was smooth as oil. I was hoping to find you here. Holden stepped in front of me. The store's closed. Leave. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm not here to shop. I'm here to make Miss Brooks a very generous offer. $200,000 for her property. Final offer. Not interested. He sighed like I was being unreasonable. You should reconsider. You're 18 years old, alone, with no resources. That land is worthless, undeveloped, no utilities, barely accessible. But I'm willing to pay well above market value out of respect for your late grandmother. Respect. The word tasted like poison. You killed her. The temperature in the room dropped. Blackwood's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. That's a very serious accusation, Miss Brooks. Do you have any evidence? Sloane stepped forward. I'm her attorney, and yes, we have evidence. Quite a lot of it, actually. And we'll be presenting it to federal authorities. One of the men in suits moved his hand toward his jacket. Holden tensed. Blackwood held up a hand, stopping his man. I see. Well, that's unfortunate. You see, Miss Brooks, your grandmother made the same mistake. She thought she could threaten me with evidence and lawsuits and righteous indignation. She discovered that powerful men have resources beyond your imagination. If you're threatening me, I'm informing you. Blackwood's voice was cold now. The friendly facade dropped. Your grandmother had a heart attack. Very sad, but these things happen. Especially to people who experience stress. Holden's hands clenched into fists. Get out. Now. Blackwood looked at me, ignoring Holden entirely. December 15th. That's the county zoning board meeting. They'll be voting on water rights allocation for this region. I have the votes I need. Your property will be declared essential infrastructure and subject to eminent domain. You'll get fair market value, maybe $10,000, and I'll get what I need. Or you can sell now for 200,000 and walk away wealthy and alive.
He let the last word hang in the air. You're going to steal my land either way. I'm going to acquire it, one way or another. The question is whether you want to be compensated or removed. That's a threat. Sloane's phone was out, recording, on camera. Blackwood smiled at the phone. Is it? I'm simply explaining legal proceedings.
Eminent domain is perfectly lawful. As for Miss Brooks' health, well, she looks rather frail. Living alone in a metal hut in sub-zero temperatures, it would be tragic but not surprising if something happened. One of his men laughed, a sound like breaking glass.
Vera's hand found mine, squeezed. We're not afraid of you, Marcus.
No.
Blackwood looked around the room. You should be. I've built a very successful business by understanding what motivates people. Money motivates some.
Fear motivates most. And loss, well, loss motivates everyone. He turned to leave, his men following. At the door, he paused. Accidents happen in winter, Miss Brooks. Fires, hypothermia, carbon monoxide poisoning from faulty space heaters. It would be such a shame if you didn't survive your first Montana winter. Then they were gone, the Mercedes pulling away into the darkness. For a long moment, none of us moved. Maggie broke the silence. He just threatened to kill her in front of witnesses. He was careful. Sloane's voice was grim. Nothing he said would hold up in court. Accidents happen isn't a confession. We need actual evidence. We need to keep Willa safe. Holden turned to me. You're not staying at that property alone. Not tonight. Vera nodded. You'll stay with me. I've got a spare room and a shotgun older than Gus. The old man cackled. I'm 79. That's a damn old shotgun. I can't hide. The certainty settled in my bones. My grandmother didn't hide. She stood her ground. If I run now, I'm giving him exactly what he wants. Standing your ground got Roz killed. Holden's voice was sharp with frustration. No, fighting for this land got her killed. But she almost won. I looked at the bag of evidence. She spent 5 years building a case. We just need to finish it. Sloane was already on her phone. I'm calling a friend at the FBI. Special Agent Iris Callahan. We went to law school together. If I can get her interested, this goes federal, and Blackwood's county connections won't matter.
How long will that take? If Iris moves fast, maybe 48 hours for an initial review, a week for warrants, 2 weeks for arrests if everything goes perfectly. Blackwood said December 15th. That's 5 days from now. Then we have 5 days to get enough evidence to stop him. Sloane's expression was fierce. Starting now.
The plan came together over the next hour, fueled by Vera's coffee and a shared fury at what had been done to my grandmother. Gus would talk to the families of the other dead landowners, get statements, find out what threats they'd received. Maggie would reach out to anyone who'd worked for Blackwood's company, contractors, employees, anyone who might have seen something incriminating. Sloane would file the exhumation order for Sarah Morrison and reach out to Agent Callahan at the FBI. Holden would stay with me at the property, help me fortify it, make sure I wasn't alone. And I would go through every document my grandmother had collected, looking for the smoking gun that would put Blackwood away for life. We left Whitmore's in pairs, careful, watching for the Mercedes. Holden drove me back to the property in his truck, the heater blasting, neither of us speaking. When we arrived, he didn't leave. He grabbed his toolbox from the truck bed and started checking the Quonset hut's doors and windows, making sure they were secure. I built up the fire in the wood stove, my hands working automatically while my mind raced. Holden found me sitting in my grandmother's rocking chair an hour later, staring at the flames. "You okay?" I don't know how to answer that. He sat on the floor near the stove, his back against the wall. "Fair enough." "She loved me." The words came out quiet. "For 18 years, I thought nobody did. And all along, she loved me enough to write me 247 letters. Loved me enough to build me a home. Loved me enough to die protecting it." Holden was quiet for a moment. "Roz used to come into the store every week. Always bought the same things: flour, coffee, stamps. She'd talk about you like you were coming home any day. My ma would ask how the search was going, and Roz would smile and say, 'Getting closer. I can feel it.' She never stopped believing. And I never knew. You do now. That has to count for something." I looked at him. He had kind eyes, steady hands, the bearing of someone who'd weathered storms and come through intact. "Why are you helping me? You didn't know me 3 days ago." "Because Roz was good to my family. When my dad died, I was 12. She showed up with a casserole and stayed to help Ma with the store inventory. Never asked for anything in return. Just helped." That's the kind of person she was. He met my eyes. And because what Blackwood's doing is wrong, I'm not going to stand by and watch him get away with murder. Something in my chest loosened, just slightly. "Thank you." He nodded and stood. "I'm going to bunk in the barn tonight. Keep an eye out. You need anything, you yell." After he left, I pulled out my grandmother's journal and read it again, slower this time, looking for details I might have missed. One entry caught my attention. From November 2024. "Showed Vera the water reports today. She suggested I talk to an environmental lawyer, said there might be state laws protecting aquifers like this. She knew someone in Billings who specialized in water rights. I called, left a message, waiting to hear back. My grandmother had contacted Sloan first, or tried to. Sloan had moved to Cedar Falls only last month. She'd said so herself. Had she gotten my grandmother's message? Was that why she'd moved here? I'd have to ask." The fire crackled. Outside, the temperature was dropping. I could feel it through the metal walls, that bone-deep cold that made you understand why people called this country unforgiving. But I wasn't alone anymore. I had Vera, who'd loved my grandmother like a sister. Holden, who'd stood between me and Blackwood's threats without hesitation. Maggie, Gus, Sloan, people I barely knew who'd chosen to fight beside me anyway. For the first time in my life, I had something the foster system had never given me. I had a family. Not blood, but something stronger. Something chosen. I fell asleep in the rocking chair, wrapped in the wool blanket, the fire burning low, and dreamed of my grandmother writing letters that would never reach me, building a home I'd never seen, fighting battles I was only now learning existed. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of preparation and investigation. Sloan's FBI contact, Special Agent Callahan, agreed to review the evidence. But she needed time. Background checks, jurisdictional questions, coordination with local authorities who were, unfortunately, likely compromised. Gus interviewed the victims' families. Henry Patterson's daughter remembered her father receiving threats. Sarah Morrison's husband admitted Sarah had been terrified in the weeks before her death. Tom Whitfield's son found old medical records showing his father had been in perfect health days before the pneumonia killed him. It was building, slowly, but we were running out of time. December 13th arrived cold and clear. 2 days until the zoning board meeting. Holden had been working on the tractor for 3 days straight, determined to get it running. 63 days after I'd arrived in Cedar Falls, late November turning to December, he finally turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life with a sound like thunder. I ran out of the Quonset hut. The tractor sat there, headlights blazing, engine running rough but strong. 40-year-old machine, brought back from the dead. Holden climbed down from the seat, grinning. She runs. Not pretty, but she runs. I threw my arms around him without thinking. Thank you, thank you. He held me for a moment, solid and warm in the freezing night. Then we both pulled back, suddenly awkward. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the barn. And that's when I saw it. One section of the barn wall looked wrong. The boards were a slightly different color, the spacing off by maybe an inch. I walked toward it, Holden following. Up close, it was obvious. This section was newer, or at least more recently repaired. I pushed at the boards. They didn't budge. Holden pulled a crowbar from his toolbox. Stand back. He wedged the crowbar between the boards and pried. The wood groaned, nails screaming. Then, with a crack, a section of the wall swung inward. It was a door. A hidden door. Behind it was a room maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, and it was full. Filing cabinets lined one wall, a desk sat against another covered in papers, and on the far wall, a corkboard covered in photographs, documents, and red string connecting them like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. But this wasn't a theory. It was research. 5 years of meticulous, careful research. In the center of the corkboard was a photograph of Marcus Blackwood. Surrounding it were photos of county officials, the sheriff, Dr. Hammond, the state senator. Red strings connected them to bank records, property transfers, death certificates. My grandmother had built a murder board. I approached the desk. The papers were organized in folders, each labeled in her handwriting. Patterson, Morrison, Whitfield. And at the bottom, Brooks. Inside the Brooks folder was a draft toxicology report. Official letterhead, Montana State Crime Lab, dated March 12, 2025, 3 days before my grandmother died. Sample, blood, Rosalind S. Brooks. Tests performed, heavy metals panel, pharmaceutical screening, toxicology standard battery. Results, digitalis concentration 3.2 nanograms per milliliter, therapeutic range 0.8 to 2.0 nanograms per milliliter. Toxic level. Also present, arsenic, 0.8 micrograms per liter. Trace amounts consistent with chronic low-level exposure. Conclusion. Findings consistent with digitalis toxicity, likely accumulation over weeks to months. Recommend immediate medical intervention and investigation into source of exposure. Handwritten notation at the bottom, not in my grandmother's writing. Do not file per doctor. Hammond. Patient deceased before report completed. They tested her blood, found the poison, and buried the report. But my grandmother had gotten a copy. Somehow she'd gotten a copy. There were more files, recorded conversations on old cassette tapes, each labeled with dates and names. Bank records showing money flowing from Blackwood Development to various officials. Contracts for land purchases, all dated within weeks of the previous owner's deaths. And in a locked box, Holden had to break it open. A USB drive. We need to see what's on this. I held it up. Holden looked around. You got a computer? I shook my head. He pulled out his phone. Got a USB adapter in my truck. Might work. It took 20 minutes to rig it,
But finally, the phone screen lit up with a file directory. Videos. Dozens of them. I clicked on the first one. The video was grainy, clearly shot from a hidden camera. The timestamp showed November 2024. The location appeared to be an office, wood paneling, expensive furniture, a window overlooking mountains. Two men sat across a desk. I recognized one immediately. Marcus Blackwood.
The other man was older, gray-haired, wearing a doctor's coat. Dr. Hammond. The audio crackled, but their voices were clear. Blackwood. She confronted you? Hammond. She knows. I don't know how, but she knows about the digitalis. She asked me directly if I was poisoning her. Blackwood. What did you tell her? Hammond. I denied it, of course. But Marcus, this is getting out of hand. 4 people. Blackwood. 4 obstacles removed. 4 parcels acquired. And 1 more to go. You knew what this job entailed when you took my money. I'm a doctor. I took an oath. You took $75,000 per patient. That's $300,000 you've earned helping me with these medical consultations. You're in this as deep as I am, Gerald. Deeper, because you're the one who administered the doses. She threatened to go to the authorities. Then we accelerate the timeline. How long until the digitalis accumulation reaches critical levels? At the current dosage, maybe 2 weeks, but if I increase it. I want her dead before the end of March. The zoning board meets April 1st. I need that land clear before then. And what about her granddaughter, the one she's been looking for? If the girl exists and shows up, we'll deal with her the same way. An 18-year-old orphan won't be hard to discourage. The video ended. I was shaking. Holden's face had gone white. This is it. His voice was rough. This is the evidence we need. This is Blackwood ordering your grandmother's murder. On camera. There were more videos. Blackwood meeting with the county supervisor discussing vote buying. Blackwood talking to the sheriff about ensuring cooperation with investigations. Blackwood with the state senator outlining his plans to acquire water rights worth hundreds of millions. My grandmother had recorded everything. Every meeting, every threat, every bribe. She'd built an entire case, brick by brick, over 5 years. And then they'd killed her before she could use it. I looked at Holden. We need to get this to Agent Callahan. Tonight. He nodded. I'll call Sloan. We were loading the files into Holden's truck when we heard the engines. 3 vehicles coming up the dirt road, headlights bouncing through the trees. Holden's expression went hard. That's not good. The vehicles pulled into the clearing. 2 SUVs and a pickup truck. 6 men climbed out, Blackwood among them. But this time, he wasn't here to talk. The men were carrying equipment. Gasoline cans, road flares. They were going to burn us out. Holden grabbed my arm. The evidence. Get it somewhere safe. Now. Where? The well. The bag is waterproof. Drop it down. We'll retrieve it later. I ran. Behind me, I heard Blackwood's voice, amplified somehow. Megaphone, maybe. Miss Brooks! This is your last chance. Leave now, and I'll let you walk away. Stay, and you'll burn with your grandmother's legacy. I reached the well, dropped the waterproof bag with all the new evidence into the darkness. It fell for what felt like forever before I heard the distant splash. Then I ran back toward the barn. Holden was standing between Blackwood's men and the buildings, a tire iron in his hands. 1 against 6. Suicidal odds. I'm calling the sheriff. One of Blackwood's men laughed. Oh, wait. He's on our payroll. Holden didn't move. You're not torching this place. Actually, I am. Blackwood smiled. Tragic accident. Faulty wiring, perhaps. Or a desperate young woman who couldn't handle the isolation. We'll find remains, of course, enough for a death certificate. And then that troublesome parcel will be mine. The men moved forward. Holden swung the tire iron, connecting with one man's arm. The crack echoed across the clearing. The man screamed, fell back. Then the others rushed him. I ran toward the barn, not away. Inside, I could see the tractor, still running, headlights blazing. An idea formed. Insane, but everything about this was insane. I climbed into the tractor seat. The controls were simple. Clutch, gear shift, throttle. I'd watched Holden enough to understand the basics. I released the brake, put it in gear. The tractor lurched forward, and I drove it straight out of the barn toward Blackwood's men. They scattered. Holden rolled clear. The tractor wasn't fast, but it was unstoppable. 2 tons of steel moving with the inevitability of geological time. One of the SUVs was parked too close. I aimed for it. The tractor's front loader caught the SUV's side panel with a scream of metal on metal. The vehicle rocked, tipped, and rolled onto its side. I spun the wheel. The tractor turned with agonizing slowness. Blackwood's men were regrouping, but they were wary now, circling at a distance. Blackwood's face was twisted with rage. "Kill her! Burn it all!" One man raised what looked like a flare gun. He fired. The burning projectile arced through the night sky and landed on the barn roof. Within seconds, the old dry wood caught. Flames spread like a living thing, hungry and fast. No. The word tore out of my throat. The hidden room. All my grandmother's research. But the USB drive was in Holden's truck, and the files were in the well. The barn was just wood and nails and memories. Let it burn. Holden appeared at the tractor, pulling himself up. Drive. Just drive toward the road. I did. The tractor crawled forward, slow as winter, while behind us the barn became an inferno. And then, cutting through the chaos, the sound of sirens. Not one, many. Headlights flooded the clearing. Police cruisers, fire trucks, and unmarked sedans that screamed federal authority. Blackwood's men scattered, running for the tree line. But there were officers everywhere, cutting off escape routes, shouting orders. A woman stepped out of one of the sedans, late 40s, dark pantsuit. FBI written across her vest in yellow letters. Special Agent Iris Callahan. Her voice cut through the night. "Marcus Blackwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, public corruption, and about 15 other charges I'll enumerate when you're in custody." Blackwood stood frozen, his face pale in the firelight. "This is absurd. I'm a respected businessman. I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." Officers moved in, cuffing Blackwood and his men. The fire trucks were already setting up, fighting the barn fire, keeping it from spreading. Agent Callahan approached me. "You must be Willa Brooks." I nodded, my voice gone. "Sloan Pemberton called me 2 days ago, said she had evidence of a murder conspiracy. I told her I needed time to build a case." "She told me you didn't have time, so I drove up here tonight to see for myself." She looked at the burning barn. "Good thing I did. We have more evidence." I found my voice in the well. Video recordings, files, everything. "Good. We'll need all of it." She looked at Blackwood, now sitting in the back of a cruiser, cuffed and silent. "This case is going to put a lot of powerful people in prison for a very long time." The barn collapsed with a roar of flame and smoke. 40 years of my grandmother's work turned to ash. But the evidence survived. The truth survived. And I survived. Vera's truck pulled up, followed by Maggie's car and Gus in an ancient pickup. They climbed out, took in the scene, the burning barn, the arrested men, the federal agents, and rushed toward me. Vera pulled me into a fierce hug. I called them. Soon as I heard Blackwood had left town with his crew, I knew he was coming for you. You saved us. My voice was muffled against her shoulder. No, honey. She pulled back, held me at arm's length. You saved yourself, and you finished what Roz started. The fire burned through the night. By dawn, the barn was gone. Just a smoking foundation and twisted metal and ash. But the Quonset hut stood. The tractor sat in the clearing, scorched but intact. And I stood with my found family, Vera and Holden and Maggie and Gus and Sloan, watching the smoke rise into the gray morning sky. That night, after the chaos had settled, Holden and I sat on the porch of the Quonset hut. The temperature had dropped, but not uncomfortably. The kind of cold that reminded you where you were without trying to kill you. The stars were out, brilliant and sharp. In the distance, I could hear the creek running, free of ice for now. Holden had stayed after everyone left. Not in the hut. He'd set up his sleeping bag in the truck. But when I'd woken before dawn, unable to sleep, I'd found him on the porch steps with a thermos of coffee. He handed me a mug without speaking. We sat in companionable silence, watching the sky lighten. You didn't have to stay. I know. Thank you. He looked at me then, really looked. You're not alone in this, Willa. Whatever comes next, the trial, the fight, all of it, you're not doing it alone. Something in my chest shifted, loosened. For 18 years I'd been alone. The idea that I didn't have to be anymore was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. I'm not good at this, at letting people in. Neither am I. He smiled. Guess we'll figure it out together. It wasn't a declaration, wasn't even really a beginning, just an acknowledgement of something neither of us was ready to name yet. But it was enough. 4 days later, the zoning board meeting was canceled. Marcus Blackwood was in federal custody, along with Dr. Hammond, Sheriff Harding, County Supervisor Patterson, and 3 of Blackwood's executives. The charges kept growing. Murder, conspiracy, fraud, bribery, racketeering. Agent Callahan said they were building a RICO case that would take years to fully prosecute. But the important thing was simple. Blackwood would never get my land, would never profit from the water my grandmother had died protecting. I sat in the rocking chair that night, wrapped in the wool blanket, feeding the wood stove, and read letter number 247 one more time. Fight, sweetheart. You're stronger than you know. I hadn't known, but I'd learned. And in learning, I'd found something my grandmother had been trying to give me all along. Not just land or money or water rights. A home, a family, a legacy worth fighting for. I was a Brooks woman now, and Brooks women didn't surrender. The FBI raid on Blackwood Development's Missoula headquarters happened at 6 in the morning, 2 days after the barn fire. Agent Callahan called to tell me they'd seized 4 filing cabinets worth of documents, 3 computers, and a safe containing $200,000 in cash marked for various county officials. We're building an airtight case. Her voice crackled over the phone line. But I need you to come to Great Falls. We have questions, and you'll need to prepare for testimony. The federal building in Great Falls was all glass and concrete, sterile and imposing. Agent Callahan met me in a conference room on the 3rd floor. Sloan came with me, her briefcase full of copies of my grandmother's research. We spent 6 hours going through everything. Every document, every video, every entry in my grandmother's journal. Agent Callahan took notes in a precise hand, asking questions that cut straight to the heart of each piece of evidence. The videos are gold. She tapped her pen against the legal pad. Blackwood ordering the murder on camera. That's first-degree conspiracy. But we need to establish the complete timeline. Every victim, every bribe, every threat. She spread out a chart on the table. It showed 12 properties in Frostwood County, all positioned above the aquifer. My grandmother's land sat at the center, marked in red. Blackwood's been working on this for 15 years. Agent Callahan pointed to the earliest acquisition. Started buying land in 2010. Small parcels at first, vacant lots, abandoned farms. Nobody paid attention. Then in 2020, he shifted tactics. Started targeting occupied parcels with water access. That's when the bodies started piling up. How many? We're investigating 7 suspicious deaths. 4 we can prove were connected to Blackwood, your grandmother, Patterson, Morrison, Whitfield. The other 3 died before we can establish a clear pattern, but the circumstances are questionable. 7 people, at least. Agent Callahan's expression was grim. Men like Blackwood don't start at murder. They escalate to it. We're looking into his business dealings going back 20 years. Similar patterns in Idaho and Wyoming. We might be dealing with a serial killer who uses corporate law as a weapon. The weight of that settled over the room like snow. Can you prove all of it? We can prove enough. The videos alone are damning. Add the toxicology evidence, the witness statements, the financial records. We have him cold on at least 4 counts of first-degree murder. The rest is just building the case bigger. When does it go to trial? Agent Callahan checked her calendar. Federal court moves faster than people think when we want it to. Grand jury will convene next week. Indictments should come down mid-January. Trial starts early February if Blackwood's lawyers don't stall. You'll testify, probably multiple times. I'm ready. Sloan touched my arm. It won't be easy. They'll try to discredit you, paint you as a troubled foster kid with a grudge, someone who'd fabricate evidence to steal land. Let them try. The grand jury indicted Marcus Blackwood on 43 counts, 4 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, racketeering, bribery of public officials, tampering with a death investigation. The list went on for pages. Dr. Gerald Hammond was indicted separately. 4 counts of second-degree murder, conspiracy, falsifying medical records. He'd been offered a deal. Testify against Blackwood, get 20 years instead of life. His lawyer took it within an hour. Sheriff Harding, County Supervisor Patterson, and 3 Blackwood executives were indicted on corruption charges. The state senator had already resigned and fled to Arizona, though extradition was pending. The trial was set for February 8th. 6 weeks away. I spent those weeks preparing. Sloan drilled me on testimony protocol, how to answer questions, how to stay calm under cross-examination. Holden helped me rebuild some semblance of normalcy at the property. We cleared the barn ruins, salvaged what we could, started planning reconstruction. Vera opened her home to me when the Quonset hut got too cold or too lonely. Maggie brought food, supplies, company. Gus regaled me with stories about my grandmother's early years in Cedar Falls, painting a picture of a woman I wished desperately I'd known. And every night, I read one of the 247 letters. A ritual. A connection to someone who'd loved me before I knew love was possible. Letter number 156, written on my 13th birthday. 13 is a hard age. Everything changes and nothing makes sense. Your body betrays you. Your emotions run wild. And the world expects you to navigate it all with grace you don't possess. I remember 13. I was angry at everyone and everything. But I learned something important that year. Anger is just love with nowhere to go. If you're angry, Willa, it means you care. That's not weakness. That's strength waiting to find its purpose. I thought about that a lot as February approached. My anger at Blackwood, at the system that had kept me from my grandmother, at 18 years of separation. It was love with nowhere to go. But now it had a purpose. Justice. The federal courthouse in Great Falls was brutalist architecture at its finest, all sharp angles and cold stone, designed to intimidate. I walked up the steps on February 8th wearing clothes Vera had bought me, Sloan at my side, feeling like I was approaching a battlefield. The courtroom was massive, wooden pews for spectators, already filled with reporters and curious citizens. The jury box, empty for now. The judge's bench, towering and authoritative. And at the defense table, Marcus Blackwood in an expensive suit, flanked by 5 lawyers. He looked at me once as I entered. No recognition, no emotion. Just cold assessment, like I was a problem he was calculating how to solve. The prosecution team was led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Margaret Whitfield. Mid-50s, gray suit, reputation for never losing. She'd flown in from Washington specifically for this case. Opening statements began at 9:30. Whitfield stood, addressing the jury with the calm authority of someone who'd done this 100 times. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about greed. It's about a man who saw human lives as obstacles to profit. Marcus Blackwood murdered 4 people in cold blood to steal water rights worth over $400 million. He corrupted our institutions. He turned doctors into executioners and law enforcement into accomplices. And when a young woman, an orphan who'd lost everything, stood in his way, he tried to murder her too. She gestured to the evidence table, stacked with documents. Over the next 2 weeks, you'll hear testimony from victims' families. You'll see financial records proving systematic bribery. You'll watch video of the defendant ordering murders. And you'll hear from Dr. Gerald Hammond, who will admit under oath that he poisoned 4 people at Marcus Blackwood's direction. The defense attorney, Vincent Thorne, white-haired and expensive, painted a different picture in his opening. My client is a successful businessman being destroyed by coincidence and conspiracy. 4 people died of natural causes over 5 years. Tragic, yes, but natural. The prosecution will ask you to believe that a respected developer orchestrated an elaborate murder scheme based on the paranoid writings of an elderly woman and the testimony of a troubled teenager with everything to gain. He looked at me, and I met his eyes without flinching. We will prove that Marcus Blackwood is innocent, that these deaths were unfortunate but explainable, and that this prosecution is nothing more than a witch hunt fueled by greed and grief. The first 3 days were testimony from victims' families, each describing the same pattern. Blackwood's offer, their refusal, escalating threats, sudden death. The defense tried to dismiss it as coincidence, but the jury's faces showed they saw the pattern too. Day 4, they called me to the stand. Walking to the witness box felt like walking through water, every step requiring conscious effort. The bailiff administered the oath. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, feeling the weight of 247 letters behind every word. Whitfield approached with a gentle expression. "Miss Brooks, tell us about your grandmother." I took a breath. I never met her. I spent 18 years in foster care believing I had no family. But Rosalind Brooks spent those same 18 years searching for me, writing to me, building me a home. Take us through what you found when you arrived at the property. I described the Quonset hut, the tractor, The hidden compartment with letters and money. The well containing evidence of murder. And when did Marcus Blackwood first contact you? The day after I arrived. He offered me money for the land. When I refused, he threatened me. What did he say? My voice was steady, clinical. He said accidents happen in winter, that people die alone in places like this, that I should sell before I experienced the same fate as my grandmother. The jury's attention was absolute. Whitfield showed me the video. Blackwood ordering my grandmother's murder. Did you find this? Yes, in a hidden room in the barn. My grandmother had been collecting evidence for 5 years. And what happened to that barn? Blackwood's men burned it down, tried to kill me and Holden Thatcher in the process. Objection! Thorne stood. Assuming facts not in evidence, there's no proof my client ordered that fire. Sustained. The judge's voice was neutral. Whitfield continued. What did Blackwood want? The water. I looked at the jury. There's an aquifer under my property worth over $100 million. He killed my grandmother for it, killed 3 others, and he would have killed me too if the FBI hadn't arrived in time. Thorne's cross-examination was aggressive, trying to paint me as unreliable, but Sloan had prepared me well. After an hour, he gave up. No further questions. I stepped down, my legs shaky, and returned to the spectator section where Vera squeezed my hand. You did good, honey. Day 6 brought the prosecution's star witness. Dr. Gerald Hammond looked like death given human form. The cancer had advanced rapidly. He was gaunt, gray, moving slowly. But his mind was sharp, and his guilt was eating him alive. Whitfield approached gently. Dr. Hammond, did you falsify death certificates for Marcus Blackwood? Yes. How many? 4. Henry Patterson, Sarah Morrison, Tom Whitfield, Rosalind Brooks. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. And did you know these people had been murdered? Hammond's voice cracked. Yes. By whom? Marcus Blackwood ordered their deaths. I provided the means and covered up the evidence. Tell us how. I use digitalis, a cardiac medication. In therapeutic doses, it treats heart conditions. In toxic doses, it causes heart failure. I administered small amounts over weeks or months during routine medical visits. The patients thought they were receiving B12 shots or antibiotics. Instead, I was poisoning them. The jury's faces showed horror, disgust, fascination. Why did you do this? Money. Blackwood paid me $75,000 per death. And fear. He said if I didn't help him, I'd be next. Did you keep evidence? Yes. I recorded our conversations, kept samples of the compounds. I knew someday it would come back to haunt me. I wanted insurance. And now? Hammond looked at the jury, his eyes hollow. I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. 6 months if I'm lucky. I want to make peace with God. I want to tell the truth. I murdered 4 people at Marcus Blackwood's direction, and I can never make that right. But I can make sure he pays for what he did. Whitfield played the recording. Blackwood's voice, cold and clear, ordering my grandmother's death. By the time it finished, 2 jurors were crying. Thorne tried to discredit Hammond, but had nothing. The confession was too complete. The defense mounted a weak case, character witnesses, experts claiming the deaths could have been natural. But they couldn't explain the videos, or the bribes, or the systematic pattern. Closing arguments came on day 11. Whitfield's was surgical, devastating. Marcus Blackwood is a murderer.
He killed 4 people for money. He corrupted our institutions. He turned medicine into murder.
The evidence is overwhelming. You have everything you need to convict. She paused, looking at each juror. Rosalind Brooks spent 18 years searching for her granddaughter. She bought land for $8 and built a home for a child she'd never met. She fought a powerful man who wanted to steal what she'd built, and that man killed her for it. Today, you have the power to give Willa Brooks what she deserves, justice for her grandmother. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. At 6:15 p.m., the bailiff emerged. The jury has reached a verdict. We filed back into the courtroom. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. The jury foreman stood, a middle-aged woman with steel gray hair. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. On the count of murder in the first degree in the death of Henry Patterson, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. The word rang through the courtroom like a bell. Guilty on all 43 counts. Life in prison without parole. I couldn't cry, couldn't speak, could only sit there as the reality washed over me. We won. Justice existed after all. The judge sentenced Blackwood 2 weeks later. Life in prison on each murder count, to run consecutively. He'd die in a cell. The judge also ordered restitution. Blackwood's assets, over $400 million, were seized. My share was $12 million. I sat in Sloane's office when she told me, unable to process the number. 12 million? After taxes and legal fees, about 8.5. Sloane's expression was complicated. That's generational wealth, Willa. You'll never have to work again. I don't want to never work. I looked at her. I want to finish what my grandmother started. The land, the water. I pulled out the geological surveys. She protected this aquifer for 18 years. Died protecting it. I'm not going to sell it to the highest bidder. What are you going to do with it? Something she'd have been proud of. Spring came to Cedar Falls with the suddenness of a gunshot. The property transformed from wasteland to something almost beautiful. I hired contractors, local ones, to rebuild the barn. We kept the original foundation, but made it larger, sturdier. The work took 3 months. The Quonset hut got a complete overhaul. Holden supervised personally. We installed proper insulation, solar panels, a real bathroom, expanded the kitchen. But we kept my grandmother's rocking chair, kept the space where her letters had waited, and we fully restored the tractor. Holden had gotten it running during those desperate days before the fire. Rough emergency repairs, just enough to make the engine turn over and the wheels move. It had saved our lives that night. But a machine deserves better than desperation. He spent weeks stripping it down to the frame and rebuilding it piece by piece. New paint, the same red it had been in 1947. New tires, new gaskets, new seat upholstery, though we preserved the old seat with its hidden compartment in a display case in the barn museum. In June, on what would have been my grandmother's 77th birthday, we unveiled the completed restoration. The engine didn't just run, it sang. Strong and clean and smooth. No longer the grinding, smoke-belching beast from that night we'd fled the flames. This was a machine reborn, worthy of the women who'd driven it before me. That tractor represented 4 generations of Brooks women. Now it would serve a 5th. In July, I established the Rosalind Brooks Water Collective, a nonprofit with a simple mission: provide clean, affordable water to everyone in Frostwood County, preserve the aquifer for future generations, and honor the woman who died protecting it. Sloan handled the legal structure. Vera helped navigate local politics. And I put $2 million into the initial funding. We built a small water treatment facility on my property, partnered with the state university for testing, and established a distribution network. By September, we were providing water to 12,000 people across 3 counties. I hired Maggie as operations manager. Gus handled community outreach. Holden managed maintenance. By the end of the first year, the collective employed 15 people, all local, all making a living wage. The property itself became something my grandmother would have recognized. The Quonset hut was home. The barn housed the tractor in the place of honor, along with a small museum dedicated to my grandmother's life. And I planted trees, hundreds of them. By the time I was old, this land would be forest again. Personal changes came slower but no less profound. I learned skills my grandmother had known. My hands grew calloused. My body grew strong. The fragile foster kid transformed into someone competent, capable, grounded. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love. It wasn't dramatic, just Holden showing up every morning. Just conversations over coffee. Just the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. One evening in April, a year after the trial, we were working on the tractor together. Routine maintenance, nothing romantic. He spoke without looking at me. "Willa Sterling Brooks, I've been thinking." "About what?" "About how my mother keeps asking when I'm going to settle down. About how I can't imagine settling down with anyone but you. About how I'm covered in grease and you're covered in oil. And this is probably the least romantic moment possible." He slid off the tractor, knelt beside where I lay on the ground, and pulled a small box from his pocket. "Will you marry me?" The ring was simple, silver band with a small sapphire. Practical, beautiful, perfect. "You're proposing while I'm lying in the dirt?" Seemed appropriate. Romance isn't really our style. I laughed, really laughed. "Yes, God, yes." We got married that June in front of the barn, with the tractor as our altar. Vera officiated. The whole town came. Agent Callahan flew in from Washington, bringing news that Blackwood had been shanked in prison and was now in permanent solitary. The wedding was simple. The joy was profound. But the work continued. I started a foster care outreach program. We sponsored 8 kids, paid for supplies, clothes, activities, and I wrote them letters every single week. I didn't want any kid to feel invisible, to believe they were unwanted. They had names: Emma, Marcus, Lily, James. Each one precious. Each one deserving of someone who showed up. 3 years passed like water through my fingers. The property transformed completely. The Water Collective served 18,000 people. We employed 27 locals. We'd funded 42 scholarships. My 21st birthday arrived on a September day that felt like summer and autumn fighting for dominance. Vera had been planning the party for months. When I arrived that afternoon, I found over 100 people scattered across the land. Tables groaned with food. Children ran through the grass. Music played. The tractor sat in the place of honor, gleaming red. Vera clinked a glass, calling for attention. "Speech!" someone shouted. I stood, my heart full. 3 years ago, I stood here with nothing. $37, a bus ticket, and a mystery I didn't understand. I pulled letter number 247 from my pocket. My grandmother left me this land, but more than that, she left me a legacy. She taught me through 247 letters I never received that love doesn't need to be present to be powerful.
That family isn't about blood, it's about choice, about loyalty, about showing up.
I looked at Vera, at Holden, at all the faces that had become family. She also taught me that some things are worth fighting for. Land, justice, truth, home. I walked to the tractor, placed letter number 247 on the seat. The Rosalind Brooks Water Collective now serves 18,000 people. We employ 27 of our neighbors. We funded 42 scholarships. But those numbers don't tell the real story. The real story is about a woman who bought a piece of land for $8 because she believed her granddaughter deserved a home. And about a community that made sure that girl got to keep it. My voice cracked. Thank you, all of you, for fighting with me, for standing with me, for making this place what it is. Holden raised his glass. To Rosalind Brooks, and to Willa, who's exactly like her. To Rosalind! The party lasted until the stars came out. Finally, only Vera and Holden remained. Vera hugged me tight. She'd be so proud, honey. I know. That night, after Holden fell asleep, I sat in my grandmother's rocking chair and wrote in my journal. Dear Grandma Roz, I'm 21 today. Over 100 people came. Your people, my people, our family. The tractor runs perfectly. The water collective is thriving. I'm getting married to Holden, Vera's son. You would have liked him. I read all 247 letters every year. Through them, I know you. You bought this land for $8. You thought you were giving me a home, but you gave me so much more. Purpose, identity, legacy. I'm not just surviving anymore, Grandma. I'm thriving. I'm building. I'm loving. Thank you for never giving up on me. I love you, always and forever. Willa. I closed the journal and looked around my home. The fire burned warm. Photos covered the walls. Outside, the barn stood solid, its walls carved with words. Rosalind Brooks, Sanctuary, established. 2007, never forgotten. This was more than land, more than 120 acres bought for $8. This was legacy. This was love. This was proof that one woman's stubborn refusal to give up could change everything. People asked me constantly what home meant. Home wasn't four walls and a roof, wasn't about property lines or deeds. Home was knowing someone had fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. Someone had believed in me when I didn't know belief was possible. Someone had built something meant to outlast their own life. Because they understood that legacy wasn't about being remembered. It was about making sure the people who came after had something to stand on. My grandmother had bought me a future for $8. I was spending my life making sure it was worth every penny. In love, in family, in justice, in purpose. This was the Brooks legacy. 4 generations before me, each one building on what came before. And I'd make certain there were 4 generations after. The foster kids I sponsored, the community I served, the land I protected. This was home, and I was never leaving. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the northern lights danced, green and purple ribbons across the sky. The tractor sat illuminated by floodlights. Even in darkness, it stood proud. A monument to women who'd refused to quit. I pressed my hand against the cold glass and whispered into the darkness. We did it, Grandma. We built something that lasts. Somewhere in the silence, I swear I felt her answer. I know, sweetheart. I always knew you would. The lights danced, the stars wheeled overhead, and in a Quonset hut bought for $8 on the edge of nowhere, a Brooks woman stood watch over the legacy she'd been given and would someday pass on. Home wasn't something you were born into. It was something you built with your own scarred hands and your grandmother's boundless love. And once you built it, once you fought for it, once you made it yours through blood and tears and stubborn refusal to surrender, nothing in this world could take it away.